I have an interesting history with Moss. During E3 2017, it was probably the game that interested me the most, and I was fortunate enough to have the opportunity to check it out. The demo wasn't perfect, but it was interesting to see a more traditional game in the VR space. However, following its release, I thought the VR aspect felt gimmicky. It was different, sure, but not so much so I could eventually see VR be in the future. Several years later, Moss the Forgotten Relic looks to answer this question by reimagining the first two games without VR. So, does VR add a lot to the experience? And is Moss a good game or merely good for the space? Well, the answer is kind of complicated, but let's first talk about the actual experiences. Moss follows the exploits of a plucky mouse named Quill. She is the standard hero that braves a harsh world to protect what is important to her. Book 1 introduces the characters and larger world through a rescue mission, one that concludes with a climactic battle against a fearsome predator that hints at a larger looming threat. This happens alongside the Twilight Garden DLC, which is also included. There, Quill needs to prove herself before challenging another powerful foe. Book 2 continues immediately after the events of the first game. Having saved your Uncle Argus, Quill now needs to obtain the King's Glass and be the champion the nation needs. Some of these elements lead to the spin-off, Glassbreakers Champions of Moss, though this game is not included. While these stories are not particularly deep, the presentation is quite charming. Instead of outright following Quill, it's framed like a parent telling a story to their child, complete with the narrator doing different voices for each character.
Your time has come at last, dear reader. While we began this tale long ago, we hope it is yours to finish. But this story is not yours alone. No. It is tied to another. And the journey you take together could change the fate of both our worlds. Shall we begin?
It is honestly a great example of how style can sometimes be a substitute to substance. It is also an interesting experience to play in succession. You can really feel how the game evolved from Book 1, its DLC, and eventual sequel, something that is perhaps best seen in gameplay. Moss features two distinct ways to interact with the world. The first is controlling Quill, who can attack, dodge, and jump, with the other being the ability to interact with the world itself. These being things like rotating a platform, controlling an enemy, or just opening a door. While the core loop remains consistent, Moss slowly shifts in genre across releases. I'd say the original release is a puzzle game with combat aspects. The DLC expands on the combat side, with Book 2 pushing it to a more traditional action-adventure experience. Puzzles also see a sizable shift in terms of complexity. Most puzzles in Book 1 are solved by moving a platform or controlling an enemy, whereas Book 2 adds platform creation and having to utilize different weapons. Regardless, both titles have a good balance in terms of complexity, simple enough where you likely won't need a guide, but not so easy as to say you'll never struggle. Odds are you'll get the solution instantly, maybe mess up a couple of times, and eventually succeed, though later puzzles are easy to mess up if you don't take a step back. Take the vine puzzle found in the DLC. The most logical way to complete it is to hit the 3 points in succession, whereas the solution is to do it in the opposite order. Something that might not stand out the second you enter the room, but will become immediately obvious if you reset the puzzle, or just mess with activations. Despite Moss moving in an action-oriented direction, it is easily the game's weakest aspect. Like, it is kind of crazy to say I played Endless Ragnarok before covering this, and even at the highest difficulty, it was easier to beat without taking damage than Moss. This is due to Quill feeling cumbersome and slow. Thematically, it makes sense. She is a warrior mouse, not Bayonetta, but it makes certain aspects annoying. Moves need to be planned out well in advance. It's also designed in such a way where it's better to bait attacks and punish over attempting to dodge. Something that feels worse given how exaggerated and drawn out each attack is, as if you're given a distinct window to dodge without having the speed needed to execute the move. Boss battles further this by exasperating the aforementioned issues in such a way where it only feels hard due to controls. Thankfully, none of these fights prove insurmountable, just less enjoyable to play. While this is perhaps better served as its own video, one I'd be happy to explore if people are interested, I still wanted to touch on the VR aspect since it is a foundational aspect of the original Moss experience. It is also, to my knowledge anyway, the first VR exclusive to re-release as a traditional game. Usually it's the other way, with the mechanics feeling tacked on because, well, they are literally tacked on. Outside of deliberate design choices made to facilitate VR, it really doesn't feel that different. If you didn't know about its roots, you'd probably think it was a simple game created by a small studio that made sure to give their protagonist a lot of personality. Perhaps the best way to describe it is weird. There's a sense that something is missing, a strange void that feels disconnected compared to traditional gameplay design. One that is often centered around elements meant to make the journey personal, be it high-fiving Quill or how she interacts with her mysterious partner. I don't know if I'd say it changes my opinion that VR feels gimmicky, but I would say it highlights how certain platforms deliver different experiences. At least beyond fundamentally different games like Beat Saber, something I'd like to see Polyarc continue to explore as they further refine their vision. While I think Moss largely stood out due to VR titles generally being weak, that doesn't mean it is a bad game. They are charming games that hit that sweet spot in terms of difficulty, where there is enough challenge to keep things interesting, but not so much so it leaves you feeling miserable. Often, the worst parts are combat, or some of the interactive elements having poor controls. It's annoying, sure, just not to the degree it ruins the experience. They're also rather short games, to the point where both games and the DLC can be completed without a guide in 8 or so hours. Having said that, Polyarc mentioned on Steam the MSRP is $20, which I think is more than fair. So if you're looking for a charming puzzle game with a delightful protagonist, it's worth checking out. And if you're still on the fence, there is a demo that lets you play some of the second game, which does a great job of highlighting Moss at its best, and, well, worse. Hey, thanks for watching. If you found this helpful, don't forget to leave a like, and for more content, please subscribe.